And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already. Of course, tonight I am joined in the special report by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, completely off the charts. You know, it used to be live and let live, but now we know it's live and let die on the political stage. And you had something there you wanted to tell me before we started. What was it?
Peter Rabbit says, watch too many DJ videos, because the first thing I thought of when I heard about the raid was, they're after the UFO file.
That's the one. Yeah, exactly. The UFO file is important to understand in all this in relation to Trump. It's the unseen factor. There's a series of factors with Trump that are unseen, and then some that are very surface. You know, they don't want this guy to retake the presidency and institute all of the tough policies against China and really kind of flatten the Democrats' agenda and the whole, you know, bizarro sort of transhuman approach, and, you know, making soldiers into robots. So what we have is an interesting split there, and this is absolutely constitutionally dangerous. We're in very dangerous territory with what the Biden administration through their FBI has done in raiding President Trump. First of all, it's never been done, ever. Even President Nixon was not raided by the FBI. They asked him to turn over documents in a court process. And in this case, you know, in that case, they had a series of crimes that they could run through the Congress and Senate in relation to President Nixon. They don't have any of that this time. Again, they're running on fumes, just like they were running on fumes when they try to remove Trump for Russian collusion. We all remember that one. And, you know, this kind of goes to our own biases, too. They're trying to appeal to these things because they think, well, if you don't like Trump, you'll go along with us. And all we need is a kind of a very fraction. We just need a plurality, not a majority. And what's going on there is interesting because I do get occasionally emails from people who are just so identified with that political process. And this is very important. We're going to go over identification a little bit tonight as well, because they get so identified that they're like, hey, you know, I don't like Trump, so therefore he belongs in jail. Or recently with the Alex Jones case, which was a total fraud, kangaroo court situation, they said the same thing. You know, it would be great, you know, like if something bad happened to Alex Jones because I don't like him for this, and this. Well, look, you know, it's a constitutional republic. It's run by laws, not by you not liking somebody or me not liking somebody. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, if somebody is found to have committed crimes on a political level, then they should be tried. The protection of them from being tried, which we see all across the political elite spectrum, is what to watch out for. And also kangaroo court situations. And what they try to do with certain people, for example, like Alex Jones, is make him an example so that alternative media in general can't go forward. You see how that works? Because he represents somebody who's independent. It doesn't matter if you agree with him or he's a shock jock or any of those things. The point is, it's free speech in America. And that's the First Amendment. Let's get it clear. The Second Amendment is all about your ability to own guns to defend yourself against the government. And, you know, these things were set down because these people had run up against King George and they understood all about abuses of power. So those things are set in there for a certain reason. And free speech is absolutely crucial. Everything that dark journalism is about free speech. Anything that I've put out here on this platform and other platforms, any shows, it's all about freedom of expression, freedom of thought. And, you know, when we get into different areas, if you're going into things that are spiritual, metaphysical in nature, whatever it happens to be, there was a time when that kind of speech would get you burned at the stake. So we have to remember how fragile that system is and really adhere to supporting free speech and not just say, you know what, I don't like that person. It's good they shut him up. No, that's not, that's a very unspiritual approach. And we see that all over the political spectrum, and it's a bad idea. And I would protect the ultimate leftist or the ultimate rightist ability to speak in relation to these things. And so the kangaroo raid against Trump, where they send in 30 agents and machine guns and whip through his residence there at Mar-a-Lago, is unprecedented and represents a real red line for the government coming in and taking over and changing this from a constitutional republic into a police state. It's no question about it. So this is where we need to stop them and back them up. And we have a legal process, a judiciary, an electoral process in order to really put that across. And that's all the tools that we can use in relation to this are there. And that's something that we're going to talk about tonight. I want to get into the reasons for the raid as well, and also go look at the official version and what they're building up into, and then show you some real deeper characteristics in all this. We will take questions in the second half of the program. We're going to go maybe about 90 minutes tonight, and Miss Olivia will take your questions before we go any further. How's the temperature out there?
People are very grateful that we're live tonight. Richard Warner says, please ask DJ what he thinks about the raid in Mar-a-Lago being the same day as Nixon's resignation.
Yeah, I was writing down a series of things relating to the date. The whole 8/8/22. There's a lot of very interesting things there. The opening of the Lions Gate. But that echo of Nixon and Trump, which we started off the X series with, if you recall, Tesla, Trump, and the Time Capsule. This is an episode that really set the tone for everything that we did. And it was like the biggest episode that we'd done. And one of the things that you can look at and find out in the research that we did then, which is 2018, is all about the connection of the UFO file to Trump's uncle and the connection of the X technology through Tesla to Trump's uncle. Now, there were things that we put across in relation to this, which hadn't been put out there before. They took years to come out. The Nixon Library, I remember, came out in 2021 and admitted, actually, we have correspondence of 500 letters between Trump and Nixon. And when we had put that together in 2018, everyone had said, oh, no, there's just one letter. It's like a congratulatory letter. But I had found so many links in relation to this. So we have to understand Nixon is a very potent piece of the development of Trump and, of course, Nixon's deep relationship, not only to the political system, but to the UFO file. And that's how we get in with Trump in a lot of these. We have to understand Trump in relation to alternative technology, as well as this political process. When we include that in there, that secret spice becomes a crucial factor. And but absolutely, I would say the fact that they did it on the same day that Nixon resigned is crucial, because they're trying to set up those types of links. There's a few occult signatures around this. The thing I will mention is that immediately the first action that President Ford took after he pardoned Nixon was to go to Moon, Pennsylvania, which I've identified as the actual alternative Area 51. So, we're dealing with different types of geography, and there's a real major piece of geography in Mar-a-Lago, because it's right there in the hot zone. And if you follow the work that we do on this program, that becomes quite significant. Okay, let's go over just a couple of straight up things and then talk about the type of documents that they're talking about, and also how curious it is that they're using the National Archives as a cover for this raid. The FBI, by the way, history of corruption goes without saying, and the history of blackmail, setting the tone from J. Edgar Hoover, and all the different things that he did in order to try to blackmail the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, and in the 60s, and all of these other political figures that would come out, and the series of control files that they would develop, whether videotape or audio recordings, whatever it would happen to be, to really have it over these people to make them do what they wanted to do. An interesting thing about Hoover also, going into some of that history, is that Hoover was really in tight with the mafia, and he didn't want any kind of, he wouldn't use the term, and he didn't want any investigations of the mafia. So when those started to happen, he was in a hopeless situation, and Bobby Kennedy was leading a number of those charges. And so what happened was there was a big split there, and he was forced to go along with prosecuting his friends, basically. So Hoover instantly thought of the, Kennedys as upsetting the apple cart. And there's a lot of mob tie-overs and echoes and Central Intelligence Agency tie-overs and echoes. But the lead face on this now is the FBI and this raid, which is entirely unconstitutional, entirely illegal raid. And we're still waiting to hear what they have for the warrant on it. But the idea that there's classified information, what you would do is you would subpoena Trump for that classified information. You would not go in there. And so they're tying this in with also the kangaroo court process of the J6 thing, which was largely an FBI orchestrated event. Let's remember. And there's lists and lists of provocateurs there. And I'm going to get into the Gretchen Whitmer case in relation to this. But let's remember where we're coming from. This is, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. I haven't seen a whole lot of change since then. His attempts to blackmail the Kennedys to get certain policy changes and their constant outwitting of his different types of blackmail. So they were constantly working around that. And in fact, they exposed it very succinctly. And it's funny because Nixon was quoted as saying when Hoover died in 1973 that Washington breathed a collective sigh of relief. And when Kennedy was asked in private what he felt about J. Edgar Hoover, he said he was as dangerous as a rattlesnake. Think about that. If you're the president of the United States and you think someone's as dangerous as a rattlesnake, let's keep that in mind. We're going to see a lot of crossovers with Trump and JFK, and also Trump moving to get the JFK records out and being stopped by something which may relate directly to what we're seeing in this Mar-a-Lago document case. And I've tried to bring this up. I'm actually going to bring it in first. And it has to do with Judge Napolitano. I've brought this up in a couple of shows to really show the significance of it, because Napolitano and Trump were friends at the time. They had a falling out after this, but during the time in 2017 for the JFK assassination records, they were supposed to come out on October 26th. And it was a 25-year law, not somebody's idea in Congress. It was a law for all the Kennedy records, and especially the CIA records, to be released. And everyone expected that some CIA agents were involved. That's what the research had really shown. Now, that whole structure was involved in removing Kennedy, but the Central Intelligence Agency taking the major role, the crucial role in the actual assassination, which was, after all, their business. And what happened was the pressure became overwhelming in Congress. So in 1992, they said, okay, 25 years from now, devil be damned, we're going to put out all the records, and here's the law. And they got Bush to sign it. And so the date rolls around October 17th, and it's October 26th, 2017, and nothing happens. And so some records come out, but it's not this crucial CIA records. So a lot of people like Napolitano go back and they say to Trump, what's going on here? What's the deal? And so Judge Napolitano, and what Trump told him about JFK assassination documents, and he was speaking. He did a series of different podcasts, and basically Gerald Celente kind of got him into this mode of discussion. And on a couple of different podcasts, he mentioned this, but he said, Judge, if you saw what I saw, you would know why I can't release them. Judge Napolitano reveals what President Trump told him, the shocking contents of the JFK assassination file. Now, this is a private discussion that Napolitano decided was going to become important, and that he still didn't understand why Trump didn't release those records, considering he said when Trump went in, he was really gung-ho to do it. And there's a mention of Roger Stone here too. I'm going to play this. So here we go. This is Napolitano talking with on this podcast and explaining that this is what happened in his conversation with Trump. Let's see. I'll hold this away from the mic a little bit because it's such a supersonic mic now. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Here we go.
President Trump promised Stone many times he would release the JFK files. And one time in one of my many conversations with him, I said, when are you going to do it? And that's when he said to me, Judge, if you saw what I saw, you'd know why I can't release it. Well, what the hell did they show him? Kennedy's brains blown out? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me, and I don't blame him for not telling me. But I'm to this day trying to know what it was.
Okay. So that's that is going to give us a big headway into what's going on here. So Trump says to Napolitano, if you saw what I saw, you couldn't release them either. So what is it that's in the JFK assassination records that after 60 years, they can't release them? So obviously there is something in those records. There's a mechanism in those records that I believe the Kennedys themselves left behind. And I think it's through the figure of Robert Kennedy and his association with the CIA director that they put in there that the records would have kind of a booby trap. So therefore, there's something in there that they don't want to release. And my own impression after looking at this case for many years is that it has something directly to do with the UFO file. Otherwise, I think Trump would have let it out because there's no other reason. If it proved that the CIA were involved in JFK's murder, everyone would say, oh, yeah, like we knew that. And so that wouldn't be such a hard thing to take. I think the idea of what it's linked to, the aerospace aspect and the UFO file decisions and the secrecy around it, that would explode the current situation and a lot of what the deep state stands for now. So this is important for us to look at in terms of what type of records they're worried that he has. Not that he actually possesses, but what they think he may have in his possession relating directly to the UFO file. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist special report. We're going to go deep tonight on President Trump's being raided at Mar-a-Lago and the FBI rolling in there completely in an unconstitutional fashion. We've never seen this done to a president before, not when Clinton was in trouble, not even when Nixon had a pile of charges against him and, had tapes and everything. The judge just said, hey, submit the tapes. They didn't roll in there and raid him. So this is ordered directly from the top level. The Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, is a completely corrupt figure now, under the orders of Trump's political opponent, President Biden, Stepford Biden. And we all know the rules that govern these things. You cannot persecute and use the government to persecute your enemies. And this is the whole basis of why they tried to impeach Trump. Remember, the phony second impeachment was all about, oh, you talked to the Ukrainian president and you were trying to get him to investigate Biden. Well, that turned out not to be true. But the premise was, if you enlist someone to attack your political enemy as part of your position, then you're out. It's against the law and you get impeached. That's the way it works. And that's the way it's going to work here too. So Biden has to be impeached for this action. And this is the way we're going to see a really nasty network and a web, and it's going to be a pretty ugly clash because it's going to involve the deep state on all sides. But the fact that they've talked Biden into this, we should look very closely at who's jumping ship on their side instantly and saying, I don't want any part of this. And there's a lot of them. And I'm going to get into them because some of them are pretty surprising. For example, Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo joins Republicans' call for answers in FBI raid of Trump's home. That's Cuomo. And we know that Cuomo doesn't mind unethical behavior. That's not what it is. He doesn't want to be associated with this because he knows it's a mistake. And he also knows it's going to be a huge boomerang. So if he wants to do anything, if he wants to run for president, anyone who's positioning themselves, they can't be associated with this thing. They have to jump ship immediately. Andrew Yang, the same thing. Big time Democrat, instantly said there's no grounds for doing this. A lot of Democrats are jumping ship on this. But I think a couple of these comments are worth noting. Let's see. Andrew Cuomo joins Republicans' calls for answers in FBI raid of Trump home. Former 2020 Democratic hopeful Andrew Yang also expresses concern. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Tuesday joined Republicans demanding FBI Director Christopher Wray and Attorney General Merrick Garland explain why federal agents raided former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Mr. Cuomo, a Democrat who frequently sparred with Mr. Trump, is a surprising figure to buck his own party. Indeed, why is he doing it? This is a crucial crossroads for a lot of people. And they understand that this was an overreach and it's an unconstitutional overreach. They don't want anything to do with it, no part of it. Quote, the DOJ must immediately explain the reason for its raid, and it must be more than a search for inconsequential archives, or it will be viewed as a political tactic to undermine any future credible investigation and legitimacy of January 6th. investigations. Here's the thing. Trump is emerging as the number one candidate against Biden. He already is beating him in the polls. Biden is a pathetic figure at 32%, dwindling down with a terrible economy, the worst inflation since 1982, and completely stagnant growth. He's destroyed our position in foreign policy by leaving $85 billion over in Afghanistan and losing 13 of our soldiers on the way out. So it's just a disaster everywhere you look for Biden. The Ukraine situation, complete disaster. Allowing that to roll and then just sending them tons of money. They just sent them another $5 billion after sending them $50 billion. These guys, they just want to print money. Now, over the weekend, as I pointed out in Friday's show, it was about to happen. The Democrats got together and with Biden and Schumer and, Joe Manchin and all those guys who pretended they were going to buck the system and all that. Instead, they voted for $750 billion bill that adds 87,000, count them, 87,000 new IRS agents to the payroll and gives the IRS $80 billion. Everybody's flipping out about this. Elon Musk, of all people, is flipping out about this because it's insane. They've never done this before. Why would you need to do that? It's obviously another attempt to implode the economy and go after what the middle class has using this arm, this tactic, and enforcement arm. And now they're making the IRS bigger than the Pentagon, the State Department. It's combined. So the Pentagon and the State Department and one other agency, all those major agencies combined don't have as many employees as these guys are going to have. This is an insane move. This is also something that needs to be undone. They did it with weird parliamentary type maneuvers, and they used Kamala Harris as the tie-breaking vote. They rammed that through on a Sunday when no one was watching in the middle of the summer. It's a disaster. And they called it the inflation control bill. And then they switched it from that to the climate savior bill. It does neither. What it does is a big payoff to those climate companies that are donors to the Democratic establishment. So this was a huge giveaway. And you do see these things, but the amount of money going on here, close to $1 trillion, just done under cover of darkness, a complete disgrace. And the IRS part, 87,000 agents. Think about that. And think about the squeeze they want to put on middle America in relation to this. So we're in a kind of a sick situation with everything they're doing. And it seems like there's a new motion, every day. They have this phony kangaroo J6 thing, which again was largely instigated by the FBI by allowing all these people in. They could have had the National Guard and all the rest. They wanted to call continuity of government at the time, and we've done a lot on continuity of government, but I do want to clarify something that I see out there. With all the deep information that we've got from Professor Peter Dale Scott and others on the continuity of government program and how crucial it is to their plans for complete control. Remember, it's just basically understanding it as emergency powers. And these people, like Justin Trudeau, like Stepford Biden, they don't have enough to govern. And so they're in there, their approval ratings around 30%. Maybe their voting range is even beneath that. It's not enough to govern. So they can only govern, in their own estimation, by emergency powers. Same condition in France. So they're looking at a series of moves in order to make this thing go viral across the globe with this idea that they can have the continuity of government program. And continuity of government, in a nutshell, was something that was set up to survive a nuclear war originally. And basically, it's just an underground government with underground communication sources, etc. So when we look at that, it's important to understand that they set up Northcom after the September 11th attacks, and the people who had reorganized COG, namely Dick Cheney, who shows up here against Trump, and also his daughter, Liz Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, they were the people who organized the new COG. And the new COG said, oh, it's not just for a nuclear emergency, it's for any emergency. So if we have a weather emergency, if we have, whatever it happens to be, including the fact that, there's an anti-war protest movement, and we call an emergency, and we just wrap these people up and put them in detention centers. They had plans for that going all the way back to the 1980s. And after the whole COVID, the op that they put in there and the things they've been floating about the UFO threat, you can see that the continuity of government piece gets heavier and heavier. Now, I went into great detail that in October of 2020, when they thought they couldn't pull off the election hijinks, they worked out a scenario of continuity of government. They started to talk about it openly, and they switched out the Northcom commander, and we got this General Van Herk, and General Van Herk came directly out of this kind of UFO lineage because he was part of the 509th Bomber Group. So there's a whole range of information there. Unfortunately, and this happens sometimes when we put information out, it gets bastardized. And so there are these people running around saying the continuity of government has something to do with Trump still runs the government or something. And it's like a Q type thing. Nothing about continuity of government. The whole idea of continuity of government is to remove the president. It's not for him to continue to be in power. When they call continuity of government, a general, the Northcom commander, takes over and becomes the combatant commander of the United States and appoints regional governors. And it's a nightmare scenario where they call it the Doomsday Network. And it's something we never want to see because it's complete suspension of the Constitution. But I don't, when I see these things floated out there and they're talking about continuity of government, it's not the same thing that I'm talking about with it. So COG is a real thing. There's a real history on it. There's deep research on it through Professor Peter Dale Scott. And this other thing, the kind of fantasy, kind of Q fantasy about, COG and Trump's still president. No, Trump's trying to get back into the presidency. That's the reality on the ground. The faster we deal with that, the better off we're going to be. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep tonight on this very strange, unconstitutional, illegal raid of President Trump's residence at Mar-a-Lago in Florida and the strange circumstances around it. This special report, we're going to go deep and show you not only the relationship to files that they believe could be in President Trump's possession, but also what it is that they're trying to set up with this loophole of saying, well, if he has an archived document, then that means he can't ever run for president again. This is the theme that they came out with immediately upon all of this taking place, and it has to be the central piece. I'm actually going to read a couple of mainstream articles on this. So this one, FBI search makes it clear that Trump is the target of the probe. They've been trying to dance around this and be like, oh no, like we could have raided him without him being the target. But now it's coming out, no, he's directly the target of the probe. Okay, well, we understand that. What was it they were looking for there? This ties back to an interesting story that took place in 2020, actually. And it's a Chinese woman who intruded on Mar-a-Lago, sentenced to 6 months. This is a Reuters story. A Chinese woman who was acquitted of trespassing at U.S. President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida was sentenced to 6 months in jail on Friday on a separate charge of resisting arrest. This story feels uneasy because did you have someone in there planting something? This is before they actually get Trump out of office. A Chinese woman who was acquitted of trespassing at U.S. President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort was sentenced to 6 months in jail on Friday on a separate charge. The incident raised fears Zhang could have posed an intelligence threat, but U.S. experts told Reuters it's hard to believe she was a professional spy. She could have very well been a professional spy. She was a murky figure, and they never really got much into her background. And so there are a couple of different people, Zhang and Liu, who were involved. Liu, whose visa had expired, remained in custody pending trial and could be subject to deportation after leaving jail. During the trial, she testified that while on vacation, she hired a private tour guide who showed her sites, including the president's resort. She said she walked onto the property and began taking cell phone pictures. This could have been an early attempt to plant information at Mar-a-Lago, and they could have been thinking, we need to be able to, get Trump on this. She could have been doing a survey mission in relation to that. Security guard told the jury he tried to tell her she was not allowed and resorted to hand signals upon realizing she didn't speak English. She left and then came back onto the property through another entrance. So this isn't somebody who just stumbled into it. She was on a mission. She testified that after leaving, she continued on her sightseeing tour. Town police officers later arrested her in Palm Beach. So there are some echoes around this whole "there's something at Mar-a-Lago" routine that they're pulling in relation to this. And I think if the quicker we get on top of that, the better off we're going to be. Whether that Chinese woman's story fits in with this, it's quite possible they should reinvestigate her. All right. We're still doing pretty good on time. We're going to take questions here in about 20 minutes or so. And before I go any further, Miss Olivia.
So I just wanted to say these are great comments. El Zen says, whatever you think of Trump, this is a dangerous situation that has occurred in our country.
Yes.
Diablo Mix says, what's the odd that this raid is a total backfire in public perception? Even my very liberal friends are like, what, what the F?
Yes.
And Tessa1111 says, the raid just gave Trump the candidacy. Bye-bye, Democrats.
Yes.
That is the feeling right now. Of course, things can change very
they'll
quickly
fight.
Politically.
Absolutely. They're going to fight tooth and nail on anything to do with his presidency. They've overreached, but the overreach is so dramatic. You have to remember one of the things that Merrick Garland is planning is a domestic terror bill. And this is in collusion with the Department of Homeland Security, who have 250,000 employees of their own, by the way. How you ever get to 250,000 employees for that agency is just amazing. But the Department of Homeland Security now is getting embroiled in the UFO threat aspect too. And they raised the possibility recently in the May hearings on the UFO file that amateur interest groups could be penalized and that Homeland Security could confiscate their work. It was that, I sounded the alarm on it because it was a step over the red line. You can always sense those. Just like when they threw Trump off of Twitter, you're shutting off, the leader of the free world to communicate with his followers. These were things that, and just like when they shut down the Hunter Biden laptop store in New York Post, that's when we knew we were moving into fascism and away from an open, democratic republic society. Now, a free society has certain characteristics. And when those characteristics go away, it's no longer a free society. So that's what they want, but they're being so blatant about it. And this move is another piece of it because it's the silencing of the opposition, which takes place in totalitarian situations all the time. You're not going to find opposition in North Korea. That's the whole point. But Trump has such deep support, and it has to be acknowledged whether you're for him or against him. His deep support puts him in a position with this disastrous Biden administration to really take over because he could easily win the election coming up in 2024. And it looks like the Republicans are set to sweep both houses in November with this disastrous job that Biden has done. And the fact that has cognitive decline and that the Democrats rolled him out there anyway. And the other day we saw that he can't even put his jacket on, right? So, when you look at these things, you have to see the pattern that's there and also what they're planning on their side. Whatever they want to push through in 2024, they can't have Trump there because he's, first of all, he's accumulated $300 million in election money. So he's already got that big.
I did not know that.
Yes.
That is a hell of a lot of money.
He's got a big bank trust on this. And so when you look at it that way, he's a formidable opponent and there's already so much buyer's remorse. And there was already so many shenanigans around the last election that his odds look pretty damn good. This is a big problem. And what they're trying to do with their slim, group of like 30% approval or whatever it is they're trying to lock down their enemies. So the fact that this stuff happens and that they're removing conservative commentators and that they were trying to get all this money from Alex Jones and that they were trying to raid Trump. This is all happening in succession, and you have to see the pattern in order to see where they're coming from and also to guarantee the free expression. It doesn't matter. Again, a lot of people say, well, I don't like so-and-so or I don't like so-and-so. It doesn't matter. They're all under the law and they all get the right to free speech and they get the right to representation, legal representation, and all the rest. So these things are important, whether they happen at the high level of, President Trump or if they happen, on a street corner when somebody's busted illegally. So, the law has to apply up and down. That's what the Constitution is all about. We are a constitutional republic. The Constitution is the answer to all these situations because all the officials in America have to sign on and swear to that Constitution, whether you're a judge, a congressman, or the president. You've sworn to the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? Well, it guarantees you the right to not have a legal search and seizure, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. That's the issue. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or Green Party or whatever. Those things are often labels set up so that we can have, fights and forget about the people running out the back door with all the money and power. Okay, let's go back in time a little bit. 6 months. National Archives says Trump took 15 boxes of White House records to Florida. This is when they were building this theme earlier. It happened earlier. Former president took documents that were supposed to be turned over to the National Archives to his home in Florida, the agency said. This story floating last January. There's a trail of Trump and his lawyers trying to get them whatever documents that they're asking for. And there's a friendly process of letter exchanges. We know that. So this thing coming out of the blue is different. I want to bring up something here because during the Alex Jones trial, they claimed that his lawyer accidentally sent them all of his phone records for the last 2 years. And so all of his text messages and pictures and private information to the other team's lawyers. And then immediately when this happened, it's an unusual thing, let's face it. It doesn't seem very likely that that's what happened. They brought it up in the court, so it's part of the record. And then, and Jones talked about it and said, oh yeah, they did that. It's true, it happened. But what's interesting is that immediately the J6 committee run by Liz Cheney and Nancy Pelosi, they come in and do what? They say, we want those text messages. Does that seem a little bit funny? And then immediately afterwards, there's this raid. So they're trying to thread together this situation to get them out of the political trouble they're in by persecuting, by using these agencies that are supposed to be independent agencies to persecute their political enemies. It's completely illegal, unconstitutional situation. And it has to be called out to such a level that those people, who are behind it, Christopher Wray, the FBI director, Pelosi, the J6 committee leaders, and Biden all have to be impeached. There's no way to get around this because this is an incredible attempt. And that's why you see these other Democrats jumping off. All right, let's get into another angle on this, going back into the UFO file aspect. Trump says he's heard very interesting things about Roswell, site of an alleged UFO event. Trump discusses Roswell. This is also unusual. Trump was coming in a lot and discussing different things. This one came up with his son, hinting that I know a lot about the UFO file and also talking about invisible jets and things of this nature, advanced technology. Now, it's crucial to remember, of course, that Trump's uncle was the protege of Vannevar Bush, and Vannevar Bush was the head of the UFO file. These are things that we've established in a series of episodes documented on our side. Now, so Trump's going in with that knowledge about the UFO file and creates what? He creates the Space Force. The Space Force becomes the presidential attempt to get that executive control back over the UFO file. We see a phony CIA version of disclosure with the CIA agents like Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, and the whole Tom DeLonge thing. That's a whole attempt by the CIA to claim, hey, we have alien threat disclosure and we're going to create these new offices. And in fact, they did create these different offices. Arrow is the latest one that are supposed to respond to the UFO threat. And Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, is in charge of that. Now, what's interesting about that whole thing is they tied it in with the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the same thing that they rammed through the COG September 11th Emergency Powers Act back in September 16th, 5 days after 9/11. So by attaching it to the NDAA, they can almost get anything through, and that's how they're getting through all of this military-oriented UFO disclosure action. It's nothing to do with the real thing. The real subject was studied by the likes of Stanton Friedman, John Mack, really outstanding UFO researchers, did a great job for years. Then this CIA UFO thing rolls in 2017. We've been calling them out since day one, and let me tell you, they've tried all kinds of misinformation online, and they've changed their stories hundreds of times. In the TTSA, I pointed out, had over 100 years of CIA experience, including top operators like Jim Semivan, just somebody who's in the top level of the directorate. Those are top CIA people. So that whole thing, the whole wave of like, oh, there's UFOs and we have disclosure on it, it's all created by the Central Intelligence Agency, who, by the way, are in control of the actual real UFO file. And let me tell you, they're no friends of Trump, that's for sure. And he had tremendous problems with them when he was in office, including the fact that before he got in office, they try to make sure that he wasn't. And so you had former CIA directors like John Brennan and people like this really saying, oh, we need the 25th Amendment, or, you know, he's a Russian agent, whatever it was. And it was all phony. They wasted tons of taxpayer money in, you know, Mueller's investigations and all the rest, $50 million for nothing. You know, they didn't find anything on Trump in relation to that. And, you know, every day now that you pick up the what's going on online, you will see headlines, oh, Trump's in this court case in New York, or like in Georgia, you know, they say, let's get his tax returns. It's just a bunch of political games to try to get at Trump so that he's not able to run again. Now, whether you love Trump or hate him, he should have the ability to run for president if there's a popular support and he can win. That's the American way. And what the Central Intelligence Agency is doing is doubling down in two directions. But they especially don't want anyone who knows anything about the UFO file in there. You have to be real about that. And it doesn't matter really what types of associations that somebody has about a particular political person. If they know about the UFO file, it elevates them on a totally different level. And it changes the equation quite dramatically. Okay. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, some of you might be familiar with Jack Posobiec. This guy is actually former CIA, and you'll see him dance around on these different talk shows and podcasts and things. And again, like, take it or leave it. You know, he's one of these guys that's out there. Something that was very interesting, though, he seemed to have a real ear at the end of the Trump White House after the election happened. And he was getting stories. People were feeding him things. But something came up January 4th. This is 2 days before the J6 incident occurred. And this is a tweet by Posobiec. Now think about it, and also think about it in relation to these documents that the National Archives is freaking out and trying to get Trump to give back, supposedly. Posobiec, Trump talking about firing everyone right now. Wray, Christopher Wray, that's the FBI director who's in charge now. Gina, Bloody Gina, the director of the CIA, who ran torture centers for George Bush. Quote, Trump wants to declassify everything. UFOs, JFK, all of it. That's the tweet by Posobiec, January 4th. This is somebody who, whatever else we can say about him, had an ear to what was going on in the White House. This is odd. This is very strange that Trump was talking about that. And it may, in fact, have been one of the triggers to get J6 in the level that it was, because they may have been worried he was going to declassify the JFK and UFO file records before he left as a little parting gift for what he felt he had been defrauded in the election process. So now let's start to think about the records. Any president can declassify any record now with a wave of a pen. Trump could very well have taken highly sensitive documents that were classified and declassified them on his own and taken them with him as part of a declassification process. And they may be catching up to the fact that he declassified certain types of documents and took them along, because any president can do that. Even on his last day, on his last hour, he can declassify a document and take it with him. So this might give us a doorway if we think about this unusual Posobiec tweet that went out And, it doesn't have anything to do with his analysis, but just the fact that this was being floated out there, and it was the kind of, echo that was going on at the time that Trump was going to release these things 2 days before the J6 incident. So let's keep that in mind as we go. I want to double back on the FBI for a minute too. So before I do anything else, though, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
No, there's a lot of trolls tonight that I have to. Okay, so
it's inevitable with the
there's
subject
a
matter.
lot of Trump hatred, and
Yes.
what my comment is that questioning and ambivalence are different from pure hatred. So that there's no space. I'm giving no space in the ideas room for hatred.
No, absolutely not.
Really.
Well, anyone should know if you're dealing in there, so they're not going to get away with much.
Yeah, I mean, you can express all kinds of things, but if you're just firing away with just Trump hatred, you're going to get booted. So.
No, and here's the point. Again, it doesn't matter who we're talking about. If the FBI were illegally prosecuting a big leftist, or a major Democrat, it would be the same problem that you'd be up against. Right now, the FBI is in the pocket of the DNC. They're completely in lockstep. But remember, when you get into that process about the people that are trying to take Trump to task right now, you've got Liz Cheney right in the middle of it. She's one of the biggest Republicans around. So let's keep that in mind. I mean, when you think about it this way, it's establishment versus populists. Trump represents the populace, even though he's a billionaire, and you don't have to buy into what Trump is, but you can't see him as an American citizen bamboozled by his opponent using the FBI. That's illegal, and so it doesn't matter. And I prefaced the entire program this way because somebody had written to me and said, I'm a big fan of Gurdjieff and all this stuff and the things that we study here, which are very spiritual at times on the program. And they said, I don't care about Alex Jones. I hope he rots in jail and all this stuff. And I said, I wrote back and said, look, that's not the way it works. And just because you don't like somebody, like they have to have evidence. Number one, the person has to be guilty, and then they have to be tried judiciously. That's the way it works in America. That's what the Constitution is about. It doesn't matter if you don't like somebody. It's just like it doesn't matter if you don't like Trump or if I don't like Biden or whatever. We're under a judicial process. When that process gets skewed by intelligence agencies or something as powerful as the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, then it's the institution that's wrong. The institution has to be stopped and possibly abolished if they're, we've seen this before. They spent 4 years with phony, trumped up charges against Trump. Trumped up against Trump. You like that one? And do we have to talk about Peter Strzok and James Comey and all those wonderful people? I mean, this was a total joke, and they were under orders, to make this thing happen for the Hillary side. So, this is the nature of how the deep state operates. And the FBI is right in the middle of it. One thing I want to say too, that there's no cover in studying spiritual topics if you're willing to violate the Constitution and send people to jail who you don't like, so that, if anything, that would make you a spiritual zero. You wouldn't be a person of any kind of spiritual insight if you have a media figure that you don't like, that you want to see go to jail because you don't like them. There's nothing spiritual about that. So if you're thinking like that, throw away a Gurdjieff book and pick up the satanic verses, right? You have to be real about these things because it does matter. And what we do, it counts the most how we treat those who we don't agree with. That's the whole thing about free speech as well, which is I don't agree with the things that you say, but I'll fight to the death to make sure you have the freedom to say it, even though I disagree with you. That's the American system. That's why we were, a beacon to the world. They're trying to take that away through, idiotic tech people at Twitter and things like that. But that's all a deep state program, because as long as we're in the process of formulating ideas and exchanging attitudes and opinions, we can work things out. That doesn't fit in with the program that they have lined up for us, which is all about division and battling, and they control the terms too. Look, they even control how you're looking at President Trump, even though the FBI has illegally raided him. Well, if we can get Democrats like Cuomo, who are, not exactly shining beacons of constitutionality, if they recognize there's a problem, then I think it's pretty obvious that people in the audience who have a problem with Trump, it doesn't matter. We're talking about the Constitution, and that applies to everyone. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, deep tonight on the Trump raid and the FBI's role in it, and the factors that are not figured in, which we may find out more about. One of the things I wanted to point out too, so odd, is that they searched, I was reading about the actual raid, and that they searched Melania's wardrobe. Think about that for a moment. What's small enough to fit in somebody's wardrobe? So they're not talking about something large. They're not talking about even boxes of files. If they're going through somebody's wardrobe, they're looking for something that might even be a letter or a single document.
Microfilm.
Microfilm, exactly. I think they may have upgraded. But if this was 1965, you'd be 100% right. All right. Let's get a little bit into some of the weirdness. Okay. New York Times, you ready? Instantly. And you just picture them drooling at this prospect, right? If Trump illegally removed official records, would he be barred from future office? ? Right? So this is, the attack poodles are up and they're ready. Now, this kind of venturing, they venture around the idea and they get legal advice. There are several laws that could potentially cover such a situation. For example, the Espionage Act, which criminalizes the unauthorized retention of defense-related information that could be used to harm the United States or aid a foreign adversary. It carries a penalty up to 10 years per offense. But the law that has attracted particular attention is Section 2071 of Title 18 of the United States Code, which makes it a crime if someone who has custody of government documents or records willfully and lawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, falsifies, or destroys. Fair enough. Is there anything else they could do to them? Shred, I guess. Section 2071 is not limited to classified information. Oh, it's any document. If convicted under the law, defendants can be fined up to $2,000. Oh, big deal. And sentenced to prison for up to 3 years. Whoa. They shall forfeit, if they are currently in a federal office, they shall forfeit that office. And perhaps most importantly, given widespread expectations that Mr. Trump will seek re-election again, they shall be disqualified from holding any federal office. This could be the thrust of the entire exercise, which is to make sure that Trump in no way, no how is able to run for president and demolish Stepford Biden in 2024 or any other candidate that they put up there, because the Democrats have made such a disaster of America over these past year and a half. Look, they haven't even, this isn't even 2 years in. This is like a year and 8 months. I mean, it's a real disaster area. Okay, so we have a hint there about where they're coming from. And these articles are coming out all over the place immediately. It's like they had them jury-rigged and ready. They knew the raid was going to go down, and now it's like, oh, is it the fact that he did some kind of document slip-up, bar him from seeking office? This is where they're going with it. And I think this is what we need to look at. Okay, FBI searches Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida. The former president called the search an assault and complained that the authorities had broken into his safe. This is another weird piece of all this, because breaking into a safe requires a secondary legal process as well. So I think we're going to find out as this unravels that a lot of illegal methods were used. The news appeared to come as a surprise to top aides at the White House. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm not buying that one. Now, a little more on the raid, and then we're going to go into the background, and then we'll wrap that up with your questions. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else over there?
Mm-mm.
All right, good. FBI agents seized about a dozen boxes during a raid of the Florida home of President Donald Trump. Okay, again, machine guns. We have pictures of them with machine guns. All right. What does that mean? If anyone stops us, we're going to machine gun you down. Were they looking to create an incident? we know there were a lot of protesters out there pretty quickly. They may have been trying to gin up a phony mini J6 in order to float their concept. Remember, the J6 hearings were some of the least watched of any hearings anywhere, even though they were done in prime time with super graphics and all that nonsense. And they spent millions of dollars producing those things. They got some of the worst ratings in history. Just a few disaffected liberals who love MSNBC were watching. So they know that they need something to really bring this process across the finish line. And they thought, hey, maybe we'll bring up another one. Okay. Christina Bobb told NBC News a copy of the search warrant left at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach indicated agents are investigating possible violation of the Presidential Records Act. Can you imagine this? This is incredible. The Presidential Records Act is literally something that over the course of time, they went back. I remember in one case with Jimmy Carter and like 11 years later, and they were like, oh, you're supposed to give us this record or whatever. And he gave it to them. And that's just the way it goes. So this idea that they're trying to prosecute him on some ridiculous National Archives Records Act is pathetic. But I think it shows where they're coming from. Now, indicated agents are investigating possible violations of the Presidential Records Act and laws about handling classified information. Trump's spokesman said these disgusting actions by President Biden's administration would make a third world dictator blush. Boy, you can't get any more accurate than that. And I was thinking instantly, this is third world banana republic style activity. There's no question about it. And that's the theme that's rippling through here, which is prosecute your enemies, shut up your domestic enemies, create domestic terrorism bills so people who are online talking about these things can be prosecuted. That's where Stepford Biden is going with, Merrick Garland, who is largely ineffectual in his previous career. And here he is as Biden's stooge and on the precipice of making the worst decisions of any attorney general at any time. Okay, another weird one. Mar-a-Lago raid Obama donor once linked to Jeffrey Epstein. So the judge who issued the warrant has a tangential relationship with Epstein's group, Epstein's legal team. And they don't know how deep it goes. So I don't want to say he was Epstein's lawyer or something like that. But there's a relationship there. And that's got to be important for us to look at too, because when we get around Trump, we have to say there's something about Trump that bothers them beyond, what we'd be saying, looking at traditionally as two opponents like Bush versus Kerry. They want to obliterate Trump and what he stands for and the populism he's been able to garner. And so this is where they stand on this. They're willing to do anything to get him out. It's almost like imperative, as if they couldn't live or go on as the deep state as long as Trump was a threat to them. Now, whatever you may think of Trump, this is the position of that end of the deep state. They will do anything to eliminate Trump. It has to be admitted, because look how far they're going in public. They're even alienating their own liberal members. And we also have to remember the role of the FBI. The FBI can be, just like the Central Intelligence Agency, one of the most corrupt arms of government, given the people who are honeycombed inside. And that goes all the way back, as we were discussing earlier, about J. Edgar Hoover and the system that was set up originally. Okay, I'm going to try to beat the clock here on a couple of these. FBI searched Melania's wardrobe, spent hours in Trump's private office during the raid. Here's Trump's quote. "These are dark times for our nation. As my beautiful home, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, is currently under siege, raided, and occupied by a large group of FBI agents. FBI agents scoured Melania Trump's wardrobe." To me, this is one of the most interesting things that they did in there, because I think it shows, again, what's being looked for is small. Breaking open his safe and rifling through drawers when they raided the former First Family's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida Monday morning. Okay, now we're going to go into really strange territory, and you're going to come with me into the past association of Nixon and Trump, and someone who came forward on this program saying that Nixon had left access to a time capsule relating to UFO disclosure in the White House, and that Trump had become aware of this and was looking for it when he got into the White House. Now, it's a strange story, and people are familiar with the program remember Robert Merritt. Robert Merritt was a agent of the Houston Plan, which is one of the deepest intelligence groups that worked directly for the president and consisted of very few individuals. Merritt is well established, and we know that he was sought after during that Watergate period and was used as an intelligence asset for 30 years. There are people I've talked to who are high level in the police department in Manhattan, and very high level Pulitzer Prize winning journalists who used Merritt as a source. I used Merritt as he was a whistleblower who came forward to me, and he said, I met with President Nixon 3 times in a deep underground bunker underneath the White House, and he gave me different instructions at times, and I became a courier for him. And I would spend 6 hours initially with him on the phone, and I've come to know him very well after that. But during those 6 hours, I asked him about his story with Nixon so many different ways that it would have been impossible to lie. And he always came back with the same answers in the same sequence about the things that had happened. So I became very convinced about his story. And he had a very solid background as a political operative, and had also told me that he had committed assassinations and things on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency. So the way that he described things, his confessional about it, this is a person who didn't have any interest in UFOs at all. However, Nixon had taken him into his confidence to get a letter to Henry Kissinger outside of the bounds of the national security state following him. And this letter was something of a copy of a time capsule that Nixon planned to leave in the White House, related directly to an energy source that they had discovered by working with UFO technology. Now, all of that is back there. We did this episode like 3 years ago, and Merritt has since passed away, and it's very hard to follow up on the leads that he left behind. However, again, given the size of what they were looking for going through Melania's wardrobe, the Nixon time capsule about UFO disclosure, it's interesting because Nixon, there are a number of stories that Nixon had planned to run for a third term on the bicentennial in 1976 on the idea that he had created a new UFO energy source that would make us independent. And so it was going to be UFO disclosure 1, and 2, they were going to redevelop this fuel energy source at Pine Gap in Australia. So I found a whole thread in relation to this. And Merritt's story, interestingly enough, there was a lot of things about Merritt which led me to believe that there was something genuine about his story. What he said is that after we released our program of interviews, that what happened was it set off a whole process between the Central Intelligence Agency and the White House to find what Nixon had left behind. And the only other thing that we knew about it is that a copy of this had been delivered to Kissinger all the way back there in 1973. So it flashed through my mind because what's interesting, and one of the things we've developed in looking at history, is this concept of stealth archives. I'll give you a simple example. In the LBJ library is a letter that's supposed to be opened in 2023 related directly to President Nixon. And it is called the X letter, and there's an X on that envelope. Now, they tried to prematurely open the envelope in the 90s, and then they decided, oh, it's classified. We'll wait till 2023. So there's a series of these things that are out there, and I call them stealth archives. So the stealth archives, like the JFK records, we know that they're there, but we can't see them. The Nixon X letter, we know that it's there, but we can't see them. There's a lot of things in the Rockefeller archives about UFOs that were 1956. They did a whole program on it, and we can't get our hands on them. So I can list a series of things in relation to these stealth archives. They're there. We know that they're there and they serve a purpose, but we don't know. We can't get our hands on them. And this thing about the time capsule and its relation to UFO disclosure, a lot of those presidents wanted, when the time came, for their role to be disclosed about this. So when the public was ready for it, they were going to say, well, this is my part in it. They wanted to make sure that their role was clearly left behind as a legacy. And it's definitely the case with Nixon that he worked on CIA Blue Book in the 50s when he was the VP. And we know he was very clued in on this and had developed with the Defense Department a UFO documentary in the early 70s. All of these things got scrapped when Watergate hit. And of course, he didn't run for a third term, which he was going to try to bypass the Constitution to do this. So this is the nature of that story. And the reason it rings such a bell is, and I've talked to retired Secret Service agents also who told me that Merritt's description of the underground lair of the White House was absolutely spot on. So whatever it was that Merritt was trying to communicate, it's sitting out there and we don't know the nature of it. However, whenever we get around the UFO file and Trump, then we're looking at something very deep. And with that, Miss Olivia, I have a few more. I'm going to turn it over to you.
I don't even know where to start. I feel battered in the ideas room tonight.
That's good.
Okay. Soltron says, Robert Barnes said, it's the deep state, not the Dems. He also said the deep state is more scared of Trump, but the Dems are afraid of DeSantis. He thinks they're very desperate to do this.
Well, it's right in DeSantis' backyard. This is another thing. DeSantis, Attorney General, is asking for answers from the FBI. Everybody wants answers from the FBI. And McCarthy, who's the minority leader in the House, the leader of the Republicans, he knows that they're going to retake the House in November, and he said, clear your schedule, Garland, because you're going to be on here every day and keep notes about what you're doing now because you're going to be in the hot seat. So, here's an interesting thing. One of the reasons that the President Nixon situation happened, because the Watergate situation had a lot of movement back and forth. He had given some things, they had asked for some things. But what happened was they appointed a special counsel, Archibald Cox, which is what they would do in this situation. Ask any legal expert. They've been out there talking about this. If they thought they had a case against Trump, the ordinary process would be to get a special counsel who's supposed to be independent involved. That way you can avoid the whole partisanship prosecution idea, which you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to just go grill your enemies. So because they didn't set up an independent prosecutor, it means they didn't trust a prosecutor not to realize that what they were up to was phony. So instead, they have Merrick Garland doing this. But Garland is the Attorney General. You can't sic your Attorney General on the public. So what happened was, in Nixon's situation, he sent his Attorney General to fire the special prosecutor when the special prosecutor was finding all this stuff on him. And it was Elliot Richardson, and Elliot Richardson said, no, I'm not going to. And then Nixon said, you're fired. He went to his deputy, and the deputy said, I'm not going to do it either. And so finally he got Robert Bork, and he appointed him Attorney General, and Bork fired the special prosecutor. And for that, Bork was completely humiliated. And when they had all these, when he was elected to the Supreme Court, they threw him out because they were like, you're the guy who fired the special prosecutor. That's the nature and the constitutional crisis of this situation. And we have to, keep our eyes on the ball with this, because you've never seen anything like it ever. No president has been raided by the FBI. It's like, it basically brings it down to the same level of the Central Intelligence Agency attacking their own president when they killed President John F. Kennedy in 1963. It puts everything into a totally different ballgame. You cannot have a security service in the United States going after officials. And that's why we're right on the verge of becoming a banana republic if we don't get these people involved in this activity impeached. And so this is why it's going to get ugly, because those people have to tumble down. And that includes the J6 committee and Biden and Christopher Wray and all of them. They need to be impeached because of what they're doing here, trying to prosecute Trump, who's a political opponent. I mean, this is a totalitarian state. There's no way around it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep here on the Trump Mar-a-Lago raid. Very disturbing stuff indeed, but we're finding our way through it. There is a UFO file aspect to this, make no mistake. In my opinion, just because of the presence of Trump's uncle in that lineage of being the protege of Vannevar Bush, there's a UFO aspect. And Trump's Space Force, I think, demonstrates that as well. And I also feel that what they're trying to do with the UFO threat thing and attaching it with the NDAA is that's the other op. They want to take it one way. Trump tried to take it through the Space Force. And, but that UFO file is becoming the ultimate political football in the middle of all this, but they can't talk about it yet. All they can do is rub the public with, oh, there's something out there and we're afraid of it, and you should be afraid of it and you'll be locked down in your house. And as I've explained before, if you thought the COVID op was something, just wait till they get to the UFO threat op. So we're going to take some of your questions now, and I'll still try to get some of these things in before we leave. Yes.
Jimmy Kennemer, DJ, why does the deep state not assassinate Trump? And Mad Dog says, my guess is that Trump is in on the wag the tail of the dog production. The whole world's a stage and they are all actors. A lot of people think this.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a few interesting things that are referenced there. First of all, Bernard Kerik, if you remember him, he came forward recently and said he felt the next thing that the deep state would do if they couldn't, with this tremendous overreach, if they didn't succeed in knocking out Trump, that they would turn to assassination. And I've heard this run through the conservative circuit. I think that Trump has his own personal, besides the Secret Service, which you get for life if you're a president, he has his own security service. And I think it's difficult actually to get at him. But also, I think that those methods had exposed elements of the deep state to such a level that actual assassinations, they had an incredible heyday. If you go back, past the 60s eliminations of President Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and MLK, if you move forward out of that, you can go to 1979 to 82. You're going to find an assassination attempt on the Pope. You're going to find Sadat assassinated. You're going to find Reagan shot by John Hinckley and almost dying. You're going to find John Lennon assassinated. So they were resorting back to this method in 1980, but they changed methods along the way. And so I think the level of their exposure, and I think plane crashes became the order of the day, frankly, and they have very sophisticated means, but also their control and their mind control aspect and entrainment aspect over the population is part of what we're looking at here too. So I think that they think they can demonize somebody and they can do better than assassinating them. That would be my take. In terms of is Trump in on it and all this kind of stuff, it's hard for us to say, okay? And what you can say is that Trump in office, here's something I want to point out. The Republicans, their constituency believes in the Constitution. All right, the DNC has lost their minds. They're insane people. And their constituency, they're making insane. But the Republican constituency believes in the Constitution. So those leaders, whether we believe in those leaders or not, their constituency demands of them that they adhere to the Constitution. So therefore, they believe in the Second Amendment, free speech, and things like this, where the DNC people are looking for all sorts of reasons to take away guns, to take away speech, and all the rest of it, and corrupt the Constitution or get rid of it. So therefore, the Republican side lends itself, at least in rhetoric and in some cases deeds and bills, to adhering to the Constitution because that's their constituency. It doesn't mean that they believe it. I mean, look at somebody like Mitch McConnell, or look at the people who are on the J6 committee, like Liz Cheney, and I can't even think of some of them, but they're Kinzinger. They're so corrupt, and they call them rhinos, Republicans in name only. You can't get a party that can be a pure party because of the number of people that are involved. You can't say the Democrats are all good or all bad, or the Republicans are all good or all bad. But what I'm saying is that the Republicans adhere, because of their constituency, to a stricter interpretation of the Constitution. They're more conservative. They're coming more from that end of the spectrum. And because as a result of that, you get more constitutional policies in relationships. So when Trump comes in, it's not that you have to think Trump was, this fantastic guy, but because he comes in and says, I'm taking the mantle of populism, I'm going to push back China, defend your borders, and make the stock market roar. He did all those things. We had the best market when President Trump was in office. He actually, aside from all of the PC rhetoric, employed real means to deter people from entering illegally into this country, which is huge because now we've had 3 million people enter illegally since Biden took office. That's a disaster. Think of how much money is involved with that. So, there are real differences on the ground. So in a way, trying to compare and say, well, is Trump part of it too? It almost doesn't matter. It's sort of like the policies, they're going to follow the policies. And if populism, if that group, the American manufacturers part of the deep state, that little small piece that Professor Scott identified that was behind Trump, they are America first. They're America centric, and their idea isn't about empire. Empire comes from the other wing of the deep state. And that other wing of the deep state is all about ruling things globally. And that's all the CIA aspect and all the rest of it. Whatever it is that happened with Trump in 2016 and how he was able to take that election, all relates to this other group, which is the same American manufacturers that came out in the 50s. And there were associations with groups like the John Birch Society and things of that nature. This group had not had the ability to have their own president. And they are America first. They think of it as Fortress America. So that is more in line with the original idea of America. It's not perfect by a long shot, but it is more in line with the original founders' idea that we shouldn't get involved in international entanglements. So, there's a balance in these things. And this goes back very deeply because, you look at the world before World War II and America operated very differently. Once we became the leaders, we needed a war every decade in order to keep that economy going because that's the economy we decided to go with. You get the Korean War, you get the Vietnam War, they almost had the war with Cuba. And then these Iran-Contra, the Nicaraguan wars, the Iraq wars, Afghanistan. It is a constant money machine. And who gets the money? Who gets almost $1 trillion every year on the books? That's the military. And nobody fights about that, Republican or Democrat. So we have to get real that this thing comes down to, if you think about, let's just use an example of President Trump in office for foreign policy. There were no wars under President Trump. He was not engaged in that chicanery. There was one thing where he bombed an airfield in Syria after they supposedly let off a chemical weapon, which I don't think they did. And also he fought the ISIS group, with the Russians. Okay. And he had a cooperative attitude with the Russians, which the people who are in those really neocon places, the neocons have taken over the Democratic Party completely. All the same people that the Democrats used to hate and liberals used to hate, now they're all embraced on all those shows. So MSNBC, they have, here's this old neocon. He's great now. George Bush is great. He's an artist. Dick Cheney's a hero and his daughter is too, all of a sudden. I mean, it's a sick takeover if you think about it. So I guess that's a long way to say in terms of foreign policy, that there's a real clear example where whatever you think of Trump, he didn't start any new wars, unlike Bush, Obama, and Clinton. And people try to get Obama off the hook. Obama bombed 10 countries on a regular basis and actually increased our troop levels in Afghanistan. So, this is somebody who organized it as drone warfare, but he was a warmonger, complete warmonger. And so that in a way is almost worse than a Bush type character because he comes in on a different mantle and instead he becomes just a clerk for the bankers and a warmonger and completely, with the help of Hillary Clinton, destroys the state of Libya. That country is completely demolished and it's a failed state. So it wasn't that way before they got to it. So there's a lot to be answered for in American foreign policy, and just blaming Trump or something doesn't cut it. And I don't want to put Trump on a pedestal and say he's a savior and all this kind of stuff. This raid doesn't have anything to do. You don't even have to choose or like Trump. It doesn't have anything to do with it. Yeah,
Thank you.
right. I mean, all you have to do is say, I don't like the FBI or the CIA unconstitutionally telling me who's going to be president. And that's what they want to do. And by the way, if they can do it to Trump, then that's trickle down security state. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, we're going deep tonight on the Trump raid. It's a hot night here in Cambridge. And let me tell you, I feel like this news of the raid is part of the kind of American disease that's going on right now. And I do feel with the type of approach in rhetoric that we can do and the actions we can take, and by telling this government, no, you cannot do that, it's going to be crucial, and it's going to send a message, and that's going to be the message heard around the world, which is the United States will not be a banana republic because the citizens won't allow it to descend into that kind of chaos. Now, what did Jim Morrison say? They got the guns, but we got the numbers. Mm-hmm. It might come down to that. That's why I say some of this is ugly, because they're so hell-bent. And one of the things I get from my conversations with Catherine Fitz is that it's not a very large group. And we can see they don't have a lot of support, but they have incredible resources at their fingertips. But the more that they get exposed, the more we talk about them and exposed, the worse off they're going to be. Yes, Miss Olivia.
And psychically speaking, we are the collective is directing so much hatred towards them, so much resentment that the karma is coming. All right, can we talk a little bit about what could be junk conspiracy here? Donna Cartia says, look at the death of Ivana Trump. I guess this is going around. Definitely a warning to Trump. And now this. And Al Qaeda says, is Barron kidnapped? This is this is going around.
He'd be hard to kidnap. He's so big.
No, he's so tall.
No, I do think the timing around her death was strange. And I also think the fact that, they're like, oh, she fell on these elaborate stairs that she'd gone up and down hundreds of times is kind of strange. But, I don't know, she was 73 years old and she had this fall. There's no way. I haven't seen anything definitive from that crime scene, but I do feel like the timing is weird. And I would grant you that. I feel like there's a few things that have happened in succession. And whenever things happen in a pattern, I get very uncomfortable because I know that's how the deep state operates. And immediately when the headlines floated, Trump can be barred from running for office because he misplaced a document or something like that, tells me that this is part of the game that they're running and that the J6 circus didn't quite pan out. And there's no question that the Jones trial piece feels related as well, because remember, who's the intermediary with Jones and Trump? And that's Roger Stone. And there's a lot. There's a swing there where Stone has done a lot of work politically for Trump, and he's close to Alex Jones. So there is, again, some kind of a crossover there. You have to pay attention to those pieces. If I had to think about the documents that Trump may have in his possession, he may have, remember, he consults his lawyers all the time. I think it's quite possible he declassified some very hefty documents before he left, and that they're tripping into that process and thinking they can prosecute him over it. That's my first blush on this, but we're getting more in, and I would like to see the warrant that they executed. Guys with machine guns and 40 agents at Mar-A-Lago, that's a huge raid. I mean, that's like, that's as if you're taking a terrorist.
Exactly.
So come on. Yes.
Well, and can we talk a little bit about how they are going to bait the conspiracy theorists with junk conspiracy that's juicy and sexy and exotic, so that we don't actually do the hard work of looking at the legality of this, the implications of this.
Well, we saw that. We saw that with Q. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. No, keep going.
No, I'd like you to expound on that.
Oh, well, the Q thing was all about, hey, everybody's going to Gitmo. And by the way, that, would have been pretty illegal too, right? Just shipping people off to Gitmo, regardless of if we disagreed with them politically. It was like a weird fantasy driven thing. So whoever pirated that whole Q thing was engaged in a lot of this. But we've definitely seen that kind of, fantasy stuff roll out there. And I told you that they were using COG recently, and some of the information I'd brought forward about it, and adopting it and adapting it to this weird thing that Trump is still president, which has nothing to do with what I talk about as COG. And Trump is not still president. Obviously, he wants to become president again. So those types of things, they operate in that weird corridor of junk conspiracy. And we're surrounded by it, especially around UFOs. And, the way dark journalism works, I've pointed this out, it's the fundamental rule, which is you have the official story, and then you have the secondary story, and then you have the junk conspiracy underneath that, which is supposed to drive everyone back to the original story. So in the case of, like UFOs, for years and years and years, the official story was there are no UFOs. You're crazy to think that. And even if there were, they don't pose any threat to us, so we don't have to think about it. That was the official story. The secondary story was, no, actually there are, and you have crashed craft, and you're doing redevelopment on this stuff, and you're gaining a technology edge that you're not sharing with the world. And then the junk conspiracy was, the aliens run everything. And the idea,
although they might.
And then so it became this thing of like, oh, I'm not going to think that, I'll just go back to the idea of the official story. And we've seen it around different things like the Kennedy assassination or COVID or whatever it happens to be, that there's those three levels are always operative. That's the core of dark journalism. You always see those three levels, and identifying them, I think, is crucial. In 9/11, for example, the official story is ridiculous. One guy operating out of a cave gets these guys with box cutters to take down the American air defense system that had been built to survive the Cold War and nuclear war. It's impossible. And I've pointed out many times that the 9/11 story is one of the most bogus, because you can't fly a plane into the Pentagon. They have, defense arms that don't allow that. It's just the way that it is. At that time, you couldn't even bicycle near the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
If you bicycled, they would have grabbed you. So you're not going to fly a plane into the Pentagon, no matter what else happened that day. So the official story is ridiculous. And then the secondary story that people like Professor Scott and others put forward is that they designated all these culprits and did this thing to create a state of emergency, continuity of government. And there's a lot of support for that. But then the junk conspiracy underneath that was what? The junk conspiracy was, oh, no, there weren't any planes involved. What you saw was a hologram or something. And so people, I don't want to think about that. I'll just go back to that official version. It's safe. So Jim Mars actually told me this once when I was speaking with him. We had a lot of really good conversations in a series of interviews. But what he told me was that what the government was great at was obfuscation. And that the ability is to confuse people by overwhelming them. So it's not even that we just put up a counter theory and that's it. It's that we flood you with junk conspiracy so that you don't know what to think. And so we definitely see a lot of that. Another thing I want to point out is you're probably very familiar with the James Bond movies. And, the author of the James Bond movies knew a tremendous amount about intelligence work. And one of the things that he pointed out in the middle, the villain in many of the James Bond movies is Spectre. But Spectre's not a state actor. It's not Russia. It's not China. It often tries to gin up tension between Russia and China. It's an independent agency that's running around, an extra-constitutional, extraterritorial group.
It's a cabal.
It is a cabal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the type of way we need to look at what we're talking about. Because I know a lot of people come to me and they're like, I think China's trying to take over America. And there is some evidence for that they're taking over certain policies and politicians. But I'm looking more for that ex-protect style group, which is not identified directly with a state actor. That, I think, is going to give us deeper answers. Yes.
So have you covered the
Do I like curry? Yes, I like curry. I'm a big fan of Indian food.
Have you covered the judge who issued the warrant being connected to Epstein?
I did, and I want more to come out about that. What we know for sure is that he has a connection with Epstein's legal team. We don't know that he was like directly Epstein's lawyer or whatever. So I'm still looking for more information on him, but it's weird enough. It's weird enough.
Najat Madri, does DJ think whatever Trump has, it would be in his safe? Something tells me he would put them in a way more secretive place. I mean, Trump is not an obvious kind of guy, right?
Trump always seems a few steps ahead of these people. And he, at different times, has baited them into different mistakes as well, I've noticed. I remember when he took the term fake news, which they were trying to create as a label for alternative media, and he applied it to the mainstream media, and it changed everything. They became afraid of using it because he was able to call them fake news, and so they were promoting his own inversion. And he did a number of things like that, which you could only get from somebody like Trump, who has the street smarts of like Godzilla, right? And I think with Trump, he didn't go far enough in his administration to get rid of many of the dirty players. And that was his downfall.
Well, and I think that's why people are suspicious about him, because he didn't follow through enough.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think it's hard to be president and be sort of enough. It's tricky that everyone would be satisfied with what you do. But what we can say about Trump on the positive side is this. He defended the border of the United States at great risk of people calling him a racist or whatever it was. He stood up for that and actually made some progress. That was one. Two, he stood up to China. He renegotiated NAFTA, which was huge, and those trade agreements. And he got us a much better deal in relation to that. And also, he stopped America from being just bootlickers of China. So that was very crucial. I think he did really well in that department, and that the fact that he didn't start any new wars. He gets tremendous credit, including creating the best economy. And it was an economy where minorities thrived. This is another thing, which is minorities had an incredible employment record under Trump. So Trump had even some things that he didn't promote very much. On the other hand, he was really bad about building a consensus, and he didn't have natural presidential consensus building abilities. So he should have had somebody who was able to do that, and the people that he surrounded himself with didn't work that way. So he's not ideal in that department. But I will say that in terms of facing up to aspects of the deep state who were in charge, he upset the apple cart very heavily for 4 years, and they're afraid he'll upset it again because Trump, whatever else we can think about him, he is a product of a productive, successful America. And so he remembers that and he embodies that. And it's that America that they're afraid of, because they want to balkanize America, fracture it into different pieces, claim that it can't get along, claim that the same issues that we've lived with for 50 years somehow are going to separate us all now, and it should be a civil war and all this kind of stuff. The reasons for that, there's multiple reasons for that, but the groups that are behind it, they don't want a thriving, strong America, and they don't want a thriving, strong middle class. They just think of the middle class as competitors now. They want, they want to be the technocrats in charge, and they basically want a transhumanist society where everybody kisses up to them, basically, because they have no choice. And so Trump represents something. He represents people who very much don't want that. And so it's the last gasp of America coming through it. Now, could it come through somebody else like a DeSantis? Could we get other candidates who could do this? Absolutely. But right now the fight is on, and Trump is at center stage with it. And the big secret in Washington, of course, is everyone's waiting for him to announce, because no one's going to run against Trump unless they're crazy on the Republican side. But if he decides not to run, then you have a huge group out there. Yes.
Simone Nyman, DJ is not addressing Operation Warp Speed. That did matter.
Well, Here's the thing. I did say that he's made mistakes in relation to that, and a lot of that was about working with Fauci and all that.
So many people were fooled. I think,
Yes.
we can say,
That's
Trump
no
was
question.
not beyond being fooled.
No, I do feel that this is something that the people, the supporters, can really press as a major issue. And, some people say, well, when you go up to the presidential level, it doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters are your local people and all that. I actually disagree with that very heavily. The presidential position is crucial. It sets the tone for everything. Now, the president can't do everything by himself. However, he's in such a position to expose things, and he's in such a position with the bully pulpit, as Teddy Roosevelt used to call it, that it is kind of an unbeatable position. So the idea that, for example, a local candidate is going to matter more than the presidential election doesn't add up for me. Although I think it's important to be very involved in local elections. Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't respond right now.
Okay. Here's the thing. I have a few things I want to make sure we get to before we leave, and we'll do about 10 more minutes. How does that sound? It's great to see everyone out there. And thank you so much for being with us for this special report and for supporting us during this special report. I definitely appreciate the help. Okay. Here's another hidden aspect. I bring it up often, but it has to be understood as part of the equation, which is this man. And that is General Van Herk. He is the leader of Northcom. He is the one that, if COG was activated, would be in charge of America as the combatant commander. So this is the thing. He now has mentioned the UFO issue. No Northcom commander has ever mentioned the UFO issue. He's the first. And what he said was, yes, I've seen UFOs. There are UFOs out there, but I've never seen any aliens in one. But the mere fact that he brought it in and that he's the COG commander is bothersome. That just happened about a month ago. So I think we're in weird territory when Homeland Security is saying we should figure out tools, and talking with an Illinois congressman about this in open session. We should figure out tools to prosecute amateur interest groups around UFOs. Meaning, if you take videotape of a UFO, that Homeland Security could confiscate it and say you're confusing them and they're trying to fight an enemy and all this kind of stuff. We can't ever let things get there. And that's why I've been so vocal around UFO researchers saying don't collapse to the CIA operation for disclosure. I've pointed out the CIA operatives. I've given their histories. I've shown their own bios. It has nothing to do with me saying, aha, you're a CIA agent or anything like that. It's all very well documented. A gaggle of CIA people rolled into the UFO field in 2017 and created this whole phony, it's going to be disclosure. But what they did was they hijacked it with a threat narrative. And as I've said before, people like Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and all the rest. And don't forget, we had John Warner, who's Christopher Mellon's cousin, who understands exactly what they're up to. And we interviewed him last year, and we're going to have him back on again. But we understand, where they're coming from. We have some background on them that goes a little bit deeper. And Avi Loeb, another one over here at Harvard, he's playing into that same thing. He's like, oh, I'm a scientist, and I'm trying to communicate with AI of the aliens that are coming in, and I'm checking out these meteorites and stuff. I'm sure they're trying to communicate with us. And it sounds like a great science project, and you wish them lots of luck. And then all these CIA people pop up on the board. It's not good. Central Intelligence Agency, the reason they want to talk about the UFO issue now is not to give you the truth. Central Intelligence Agency is the father of lies in this country. They've caused more problems around the world, and we've had to clean up more messes because of their missteps. And it's been a huge battle of their extra constitutional abilities and powers. And the fact that they have their own Air Force, and it's a completely bloated, out-of-hand situation. But, if you go back to the Kennedy era, you understand the fight and when they ran away with the ball. And the Kennedy administration when they got into office, the word is that Kennedy could not believe the amount of power that they had over our foreign policy and their own decision making, and that the president was almost a secondary figure. So in that battle to retake that power, and also that includes the UFO file, by the way, that's where the Kennedy assassination thing becomes the black hole in American culture background. And that's where the media lied and the government lied and all the rest. So we have a problem that dates back to then. A number of things has happened, over 60 years. But the fact that they still haven't let those records out, that kind of gives us a very strong hint. But a lot of it has to do with the way that the founding fathers set up this country. It didn't involve having a king as a dictator, but it did involve having the president balanced against these other forces and making those decisions. It didn't involve anything like, here's the Central Intelligence Agency to tell you what to do. And by the way, they represent international finance and New York high finance, and they get to tell America what to do. So it's a really big problem, and anyone who's studied it sees the CIA honeycombed through the media. People on the left, like Glenn Greenwald, for example, it's very obvious to them that the CIA has taken over something like MSNBC. So all you hear is propaganda. That's why you can't trust what you think if you've been listening to those media outlets. You have to kind of deprogram yourself and get to the bottom of it. So that kind of control that the Central Intelligence Agency has over a number of our institutions, has over entertainment, has over the press, is dangerous to the development of a free and open society. And they have an enforcement arm, which has caused, as I said, major problems at home and abroad. And the FBI now following suit. They already gave us all kinds of phony information on Trump when he was president, because they're part of this deep state piece that doesn't want Trump in there. So when he was in there, they try to hamstring him through all of these different investigations. We went through the people, Comey, Strzok, and all the rest of it. Those are all FBI people. Whose bidding are they doing? That's part of a major deep state wing network. And now they've taken this incredibly bold step of raiding President Trump. Think about that. They're raiding a president, trying to find evidence against him to put him in prison. I mean, this is a sick reality, especially since it's an alternating party. And so this guy Biden is punishing his enemies. He's trying to make sure that guy doesn't come in and take over, because his popularity, the guy he's attacking, his popularity is growing while Biden is sinking like a rock.
Right. This is actually crucial. This is about disenfranchising the American voter.
Yes.
Which we already had happen. And they're trying to make sure that it's going to happen again. Would you say, Tubatorium says, have we not been in a banana republic since 1963?
Well, there's no question that they overthrew the government in 1963. And that's what the CIA had done in other governments. A lot of people have said we haven't had any open elections since then. And, this is pretty interesting too, because the electoral process goes right to the heart of this. There's an interesting thing that happened on social media in relation to the 2020 election, which is if you talked about it under a certain way, you could get banned or whatever, because if you questioned it, lo and behold, you were the ultimate heretic. But what's interesting is if you went back 4 years earlier to Trump being elected, all of the Democrats were saying the same thing. Oh, this election wasn't legitimate because she won the popular vote and all the rest. And so he's not my president. We're the resistance and all that stuff. But it didn't matter, because that wing that was in power is just about their belief systems. So we have to be able to understand the complex interlocking power groups that are operative. And I like identifying the UFO file as a piece of it. Certainly there are other strands, but that's an important one to bring into this conversation, because I think we could understand certain things better. When we look at a situation like their intensely deep hatred of President Trump, it may go further than just, oh my God, he's going to have a totally different set of policies and he has the people behind him. It might be literally he knows what we know about the UFO file. That has to be on the table. It's a crucial piece of it. But nonetheless, just as a constitutional question, we can't have political figures being raided by their opposition using the incredible enforcement arm of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's an unconstitutional set of circumstances.
Yeah, we all have to be better educated about the history of Russia and China and what went down there. And because if we were better informed, we would see the same things starting to happen now here.
No question. No question. That's a perfect point. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, deep report here on Trump on this very interesting August evening. And we did point out that the 8/8/22 was strange on a number of levels for pulling this action. And I think there's more to be said about that. But the fact that it was the anniversary of the 48th anniversary of Nixon resigning also gives us that echo, because the people who operate in the deep state, and this includes the FBI and the CIA, they do have an occult attachment to methods and formulas, numerology, astrology, and things of this nature. And the sooner we get that through our head without running away too much with our imagination. But if we can get something of a good handle on that, I'd say we're going in a much better direction. We start to understand, like we look at something like the August Lionsgate piece and that they want to open it up. Well, this is the anniversary of what? Dropping the atomic bomb. So the momentum, and the nature and the symbolism that's involved is something I think that we get a handle on. We also have to get a handle on Trump as a conduit for the relationship Tesla with Trump's uncle researching Tesla's work and also being a protege of Vannevar Bush. Those things are on the record now. We put the Vannevar Bush protege piece on the record. And I think once we get that clear, and I could still recommend the episode we did, Tesla, Trump, and the Time Capsule. There've been a series of others, but we did that a few years ago, but it holds up, and it gives us that snapshot of Trump's background and why it represents more than, there's this real estate mogul who's coming in here. You have to look to advanced technology for it. And it opens things up quite a bit, as people like Dr. Farrell, for example, have given us some very big hints on. Yes.
Do you want to let everybody know what's happening tomorrow?
No, actually, but we're going to have some very interesting, interviews coming up for you this weekend. So just
really juicy.
Stay tuned on those. Miss Olivia, 2 more questions.
I just wanted to go back into, Lady Virgo says, using the Syrian Lionsgate for hats. And this is because the Lionsgate portal is it's all about manifesting, right? And you're supposed to meditate and bring in the positive and abundance and prosperity and your vision for the future and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And, they use astrology. They clearly do.
Oh my God. Do you remember the incredible blowout when it was discovered that Nancy Reagan was basically working with this astrologer for Reagan for everything that he did after the assassination attempt, for all his public appearances, for all his policy moves? They understand the nature of astrology very well. I don't think astrology is fundamentally understood in this era the way that it should be, but it's starting to get in there. And there's no question that when they're operating on a level to achieve something on a policy basis, they certainly have their motivations and they have their plans drawn, et cetera. But something about them has this much deeper secret society background. And I think even beyond astrology, numerology, gematria, all these things are rolled into the activities that they make. And we've seen a lot of occultism that's been pointed out in deep events, certainly in the JFK assassination, 9/11. There's no question about it. But I think you saw it with the COVID piece too. I'll point out a couple of quick things before we leave here. McCarthy threatens to probe Garland after Trump FBI raid. This is the other thing, which is, the gloves are off. on this side. And they're saying to Garland, if you move forward as Biden's puppet to prosecute Trump, you're going to regret it because the Republicans are going to retake the House. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy promised on Monday that if Republicans take back the chamber after November's midterm elections, that they're going to have probe of Garland and his activities here. This is important, and it shows the stakes are very high and that things are going to get really bad in that relation. But it could be that it's a clash that can't be avoided, and so therefore it's the way it goes. Dick Cheney came out in a viral ad saying that the biggest threat to America was Donald Trump. Think about that. Cheney, who firebombed Iraqi citizens and
when
created,
did he do that?
Well, as part of the Iraq War.
No. When did he come out and say this?
He came out a week ago, and there he is saying that Trump is the big thing.
Well,
because,
you know what? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
It's quite interesting.
That tells you a
isn't it?
lot.
Yeah, it does. And I think the resurfacing, and by the way, the Democrats love, they're like, can we get Dick Cheney with Rachel Maddow? I mean, it's a sick situation. And of course, Maddow sold out a long time ago to the war machine. And, she's just babbling off this insane stuff. But one of the interesting things that I think that when we get to Cheney and Liz Cheney is they're representing that thing. They're trying very hard to take Trump down. And you have to wonder, that wing, remember, it's the Republican wing trying to take the other Republicans down. That brings us to a real understanding of what the deep state is all about, because those institutional Bush Republicans just want Trump to go away because they don't want anything. It has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. They have more in common with the Clintons, who they party with and, take over Haiti with and all the rest. So that helps us to understand and be like, oh, there are no parties, when you get right down to it. But I will say again that the Republicans need to play to that constitutional constituency. So it gives us a much better idea. A couple of quick quotes here. Statement by Donald Trump, and then we'll wrap it up with a question. With Miss Olivia. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Great to have you with us. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter that keeps us in touch through the incredible censorship that we've seen. Just remarkable. So it's a free newsletter, and it lets you know the exciting interviews. There's the word interview coming up. Of course, interviews this Friday. Documentaries, very exciting 6-part documentary coming up, and events. Exciting events coming up this fall. You're going to want to know about those. Make sure you're on that very important list. Okay. Quick comment here by Donald Trump in response to all this. These are dark days. These are dark times for our nation, as my beautiful home, Mar-A-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, is currently under siege, raided, and occupied by a large group of FBI agents. Nothing like this has ever happened to a president of the United States before. That's true. After working and cooperating with the relevant government agencies, this unannounced raid on my home was not necessary or appropriate. It's prosecutorial misconduct and weaponization of the justice system, an attack by radical left Democrats who desperately don't want me to run for president in 2024, especially based on recent polls, and who will likewise do anything to stop Republican and conservatives in the upcoming midterm elections. Such an assault could only take place in a broken third world country. Sadly, America has now become one of those countries, corrupt at a level not seen before. They even broke into my safe. What is the difference between this and Watergate, where operatives broke into the Democratic National Committee? Here in reverse, Democrats broke into the home of the 45th President of the United States. Political persecution of President Donald Trump has been going on for years, with the now fully debunked Russia scam, impeachment hoax number 1, number 2, and so much more. It just never ends. It is political targeting at the highest level. And so he goes on. But I think it's an appropriate response on Trump's part. And the FBI is the one who has to answer here with Stepford Biden and the administration for misusing the powers of the federal government to prosecute their enemy, their deep state rival. And for me, this is a one of those feelings, you can feel it in your gut. There's a sickness associated with the activity of raiding the former president in this. And again, whatever your political stripe, that's not the way we do things in America. This isn't North Korea. And so my recommendation is to use all the electoral and judiciary and bully pulpit and media and everything to force this deep state group back, and to let them know that this is a line in the sand, and their actions will not stand on this. And that's where I think we're coming from it. And again, whether it was Democrat or Republican, I think it's important to take that type of position. In this case, where Trump is the political rival of the current failing president, it's particularly pernicious, and therefore we have to take it very, very seriously. And with that, Ms. Olivia, your last question.
Najat Madri, could this lead to civil war? And I would add to that, how do we make sure we don't play into their hands at all?
Well, yeah, it's very easy for them to create a J6 style event out of this. And again, a lot of that was brought on by the FBI. I actually had put aside a number of articles that I didn't get to, but I'll say this. GOP Representative Bishop rips FBI Trump raid as October surprise, similar to cooked up Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot. Remember that? It was found out that the whole Governor Whitmer thing, who's one of the biggest kind of martial law lockdown governors, and was like, you can't buy seeds. Remember her? What a charmer with her leather jacket. So that whole thing, and then the phony idea, it turns out that the 5 people who were involved in planning this kidnapping, 4 of them were FBI agents, and 1 guy had been duped into this thing. This is how the FBI operates. And we saw that in 9/11. We saw it in the Boston bombing. We've seen it in a number of different things where the FBI is working with and working on people and trying. And so we saw this with J6. There's a lot of FBI operatives involved on the ground trying to whip up the situation. So this is illegal use of the FBI. It's very dangerous, especially adding 87,000 agents to the IRS and giving the FBI all this power. This is turning America into that banana republic. We cannot have a security state on that level. The CIA already runs the media, and I think with disastrous results, in my opinion. So we need a real major overhaul and reform of these security agencies. And, the whole world is watching. And so, we really can't fail. I would say in this case, we can really make it known that this won't stand in terms of the persecution politically of Trump by the Biden administration and the FBI. It might as well be any one of us. So the Constitution completely prohibits that. And I think legally we are standing on very solid ground. And with that, we'll be watching it closely, and any breaking stories around it will be all over it.
Did you ever get around to the Kentucky Fried Chicken thing?
Oh, yes. Yes. Good point. Well, many of you know that in relation to the stories that we do on the Hot Zone, that we did something major on Colonel Sanders and Colonel Sanders' daughter, and how she was a major advocate for finding Atlantis, and that she worked with high-level scientists like Marvin Minsky. So we have an episode there called The Colonel in the Hot Zone, which I highly recommend. But one of the things that came out in the middle of all that was that Ghislaine Maxwell, through this case of Virginia Giuffre, it came out that Maxwell and Epstein had targeted Minsky, but also targeted Alexandra Cousteau. And both of them are deeply involved with Atlantis research. And Minsky, who was the big MIT head of AI and, created that Terminator metal hand and all that kind of stuff, he was best friends with Colonel Sanders' daughter. So this link of the Colonel and the search for Atlantis, which goes deep into our Hot Zone investigations, is very important, and it's going to be part of this documentary series we're bringing forward. What's interesting is right in the middle of that whole Mar-a-Lago thing, again, the Colonel and his family and his associations and his business associations pop up, and here it is. So it's all about Trump's purchase of Mar-a-Lago, And one of the things that happened there is that Trump learned about the estate after unsuccessfully trying to purchase and combine 2 apartments in Palm Beach for his family. He offered the Post family $15 million for it, but they rejected it. Trump purchased the land between Mar-a-Lago and the ocean from Jack C. Massey, the former owner of KFC, for only $2 million, stating he intended to build a home that would block Mar-a-Lago's beach view. The threat caused interest in the property. To decline, and Trump ended up getting the property for $7 million in 1985. But the actual land tract was Jack Massey. He owned it, and he was the head of, he was the guy who bought from the Colonel all the franchises. And he and John Y. Brown, who became a political figure and was a Mormon, also figure into this whole hot zone story. So there's, again, the presence of the Colonel around the Mar-a-Lago story. And again, we find ourselves deep in geopolitical hotbed of activity in the hot zone. So,
it's so
the fun never ends on that one. Absolutely stunning. And with that, I'm going to do a couple of shout outs here, unless you have something else.
I have a bunch of people to thank.
Yes, please.
Okay. Havardian, Gillenjoy R, a cult fan, Channeling the Heart, Barbara Joyce, Kat Gray, Mark Lane, W.C. Ray, Izzy the Great, Gray Malkin, Global Atlantis, Stephen, Bob Bindert, Eurythmia's Fun, Medley Childress, SS Space Ghost, Tricky Vicky, GDNPB, Joseph P. Anthony, Easy Gamer 89, John Lavalette, L. Zen, Kessler, Robert Scott, Erica Swenson Elliott, Jim Sarge 3ID, Sarah Jane, Dumbledore's Army, Jimmy Kennemer, and CT. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. And it allows us to bring these kind of reports to you, and makes all the difference. So thank you very much for tonight. And thank you to our subscribers as well. You really help us keep going on the work that we're doing. And we do appreciate it. We have some exciting shows coming up for you for the X series, and also some great interviews this weekend. I'll do a couple of, I'm going to, let's see here, highlight a couple one of these. There's something about a KFC recipe here. Why would the feds want the KFC recipe? Well, it begs the question now, doesn't it? It just begs the question. Thank you, James, very much. Corky Goss, Jennifer Walters, Alchemistry. Excellent. Just a great crew out there in the Ideas Room tonight. Mr. Wonderful. Hey, isn't that my name? What's going on here? Mr. Wonderful, thank you for being here. We very much appreciate it. Najat, it's great to see you. Jay Mallet, outstanding. It's great to see you there. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Golden Girl, yes, I would agree with that. Amazing Ideas Room tonight. The conversation and the comments are just completely off the chart. We will be back with you on Friday. Some very exciting guests coming up. And make sure, again, that if you haven't already, sign up for the free newsletter. That keeps us all in touch. And we'll be keeping a very close eye on this story. We may have something coming up in relation to this. And as soon as they release that warrant, I know we're going to jump on the air again, because I want to know what's in there as well. There's no question about it. Josh, thank you. You guys never disappoint. Thank you. Lucy World. I know Gigi Young was out there. Outstanding. Her latest video is just off the charts. And we're going to have Gigi back very soon, working on something really interesting there. Let's see. Mind Control Inc. Undestroyer. Jack Nelson. Good show. Thank you very much. Plan D. Wow. Great crowd out there. Outstanding. Johann Wolf. Opening those Trump boxes is going to be like, wait, where's the rest of that? It went away.
Christmas, like Christmas.
Ah, there it is. Opening those Trump boxes is going to be like Christmas. I couldn't agree with you more. Can you imagine? And they're going through Melania's clothing. Like,
I'd love to go through Melania's clothing.
How small is this thing, though? I mean, is it like a letter? It must be. Very, very strange. Whatever it is, if that's not just a MacGuffin for them to do what they're doing. Atlantis didn't sink itself. Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. Much love, Esoteric Fairy Tales. Thank you very much. Much love back to you. And we're going to see you all on Friday. So have a fantastic week. And let's keep a really close eye on this story. And again, regardless of where we fall on the political spectrum, we're going to keep the country constitutional and obeying the Constitution and the law. And that's really what we're all about. And I don't care who we're talking about. I just as gladly, support anyone who was on the left or the right or libertarian or green, whatever, if the FBI was after them, because, we can't have those institutions be used as blunt objects to stop the discourse, political discourse in this country, or to get the leaders that we elect by the majority. So it's not going to work. But it is very dangerous. My God, the activity on their side represents an escalation. And just like their weird escalation against a nuclear-powered Russia, with Ukraine and all the rest, and getting all these other countries like Finland into NATO, that's more hassle, right? It's more of this let's fight with Russia thing. So they're a very dangerous group that's operational right now. So the sooner we expose them, the better. And that's what we're here for. We will see you all on Friday. Have a great week, everyone. Any of us could be next. Andy B, absolutely correct. But as long as we're, in solidarity with each other, I think our odds are a whole heck of a lot better. What was it? Benjamin Franklin, he's like, we've got to hang together or they're going to hang us separately. That's pretty good. Good old Ben. He sort of knew what he was talking about. He dealt with the deep state in 1776. Everyone, thank you so much. We'll see you. And it says end broadcast, but Miss Olivia?
Never really ends.
Miss Olivia, you did an outstanding job tonight. Thank you. Outrageous. Round of applause for Olivia. And
Troll Slayer.
On very short notice, too. Thank you. And we'll see you all on Friday.
Okay. God bless.